please join me on stage and let's have a fireside chat. So earlier in the week, we talked over a video conference, and much of what we talked about was we want to focus on the founding stage, because there's a lot of pre-seed and seed founders here. Let's chat through why you started OpenTable and what was that like?
Yeah, so first of all, Tim, great to be here. Nice to see everyone. It's, I mean, a phenomenal event, and so thanks for doing this for the community, certainly. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a simple story in that my wife was trying to make restaurant reservations for her family, for her, parents when they were coming into town, and between, at the time it was City Search. There was Digital Cities by AOL, if anyone remembers that, and a Zagat guide, which was a booklet, and it took her 3.5 hours. Now she's sort of a perfectionist because her family's in the restaurant industry and whatnot, and so it took her about 3.5 hours to do it one Saturday morning. She'd call one place, and then she'd ask about food intolerances and her allergies and things like that, and so. I was in a business that was semiconductors, and I'm not, I have a econ undergrad, not a technical undergrad. And so there was this thing called the internet that was starting to get, popular. And so I was here in the Bay Area. Half the people I knew were starting internet companies. And so I said, there's got to be a better way. And so quit my job 2 months after I got married and started OpenTable.
And this was 98 or 99?
98, early 98.
And as we talked about, was listening to the podcast. That first fundraise was really interesting. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to get about a $50K loan from my father-in-law, which was great and sort of super helpful. And I had no idea how to raise money. I knew some people that were out there doing.
10th Mountain didn't teach you that?
What's that?
The 10th Mountain didn't teach you how to fundraise?
Did not work on founders raising capital. So no, but it was, it was just one of those experiences where, there was a number of things that sort of piled up. So there was a book at the time called Industry Standard, which was sort of a magazine. And in that Industry Standard, I think it was a weekly, I don't know, it could have been a monthly, but, they would pile up on my desk, and they would profile certain people. And so this was a person who just fundraised, or this person who just sold their business or whatever. And so each week I would pull out that magazine, figure out who had attention or who had been doing something. I would call them up and say, hey, I'm a founder, I want to ask you a bunch of questions. And usually I had like 3 or 4 questions, and probably 9 times out of 10 they were totally willing to answer those questions. I was asking for advice, not sort of money. And so they all like to have their, egos improved by, people coming to them. And so just learned a lot about, what are some of the things that, investors are looking for, and how do you, tell the story of the business, and how do you think about, what use of funds are, and how do you build a deck. And it was just, this was sort of before a lot of the, tools that are sort of out today. And, a couple things that sort of stood out is, one was, I wanted as many people around my business as I could to make us successful. And so in my first round, I was targeting a 500K round, and was oversubscribed to before that. So I was raising 500K, and I wanted as many people around the business as possible. And so we had 45 investors in that round. So if you do the math, it's not big checks. But the idea was if we needed help in some area, whether it's marketing or sales or tech or whatever, that we had a resource of people around us that had a vested interest in our success. And so I was lucky enough to get about, first of all, I was a restaurant technology, and I got to meet an investment banker who did restaurant deals like Olive Garden and a bunch of those back in the day, and they were missing out on the .com evolution or revolution, and so they were interested in how do we get involved in that. And we were a restaurant tech that had a .com at the end of it, and so they were happy to get excited about it. And so we got a bunch of people within a Montgomery Securities here in San Francisco before it got gobbled up. And we were able to raise, 10K, 20K, 15K, 5K from that. We got 1.2 million committed. We cut everyone back, or we did pro rata back to 750K, raised the 750K. The next day, we opened up another round for a $2 million round and closed that 3 weeks later because we had so much momentum. We wanted to take the capital while we could.
It felt like 98 web is what AI is now. Is that a good analogy or not?
I think so, yeah, I think it was. I mean, I think you're gonna see a boom. I think you're gonna see a bust. And then you're going to see it, the internet's done okay since 98, if I'm being honest. But, and so I think the same thing. I think there's a lot of, there's a ton of capital coming into AI. I think it's a good thing. I think you're going to need, it's like you don't want a town with one restaurant. You want a town with 50 restaurants because the good ones survive and the bad ones get turned over. And so that's how you overinvest in things. That's how you get the good companies that come out of it. You want a lot of variety out there from an industry or from a humanity standpoint. We want a lot of companies that are trying a lot of different things, and the ones that stick are going to be the ones that Google was the 18th search engine started, right? And so Facebook wasn't the first social media site, right? And so most of these businesses. There's some nuance, if you go back to, the one problem that Google solved, the sort of backlinking that no one else had solved, that's the innovation that changes that. And so we do need overinvestment in a space for a while, and everyone's going to, ho-hum AI in 18 months when it has its implosion or whenever it does. But on the backside of it, there's going to be some real winners.
And then for OpenTable, did it similarly have this rise, and then you had to trough, and then you had to rebuild? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky. We had, serendipity, obviously a lot of hard work, but a lot of serendipity. We'd met some great investors. We'd met Bill Gurley from Benchmark Capital, one of the, top investors on the planet. He's a two-sided network guy. I basically stalked him because I knew I wanted him on my cap table. And so when I would see him speaking at an event somewhere in the Bay Area, I'd go to that event and follow him out to his car and, things like that, with a sort of hopefully a tight story, that resonated with him. But there was some serendipity. He happened to go to 3 of our restaurants within a week here in San Francisco, see the system on the counter. Because basically, if anyone's not familiar with how OpenTable works or OpenTable in general, it's a restaurant reservation system that sits in the restaurant at the host stand. And it basically does 3 things. It used to be replace the paper-based system that they used to use before, and it did 3 things: reservation management, table management, and guest management. So reservation management, making, changing, canceling, confirming reservations. Table management, how are my servers being sat, which tables are sitting, which couples are sitting, or people are sitting where, when are they likely to turn over? And then guest management, who are my VIPs, who are my wine drinkers, who are my best customers, and how do I keep track of them and market out to them, and things like that. And so he went to randomly 3 of our restaurants and saw the host, who was super excited about the system. And when he asked about it all 3 times, one of them actually pulled him back behind the counter and was showing him how to use it. He got excited that, there was that much customer engagement. And it was interesting yesterday on one of your later panels, hearing the HR panel just about, customer delight and how a product works. I'm a huge, how do you make it, how do you get into the nuances? Because for the first sort of 9 months of OpenTable, I would spend 3 or 4 days a week in a restaurant, 2 to 3 hours sort of a night, just watching everything they did at the host. And they would do little things on the reservation book that would, as a customer would come in and they were checking them in and the table might not be ready yet. So they would put a little, arch and be like, well, what's that? Well, that's someone that's bald, so I know how to go find them in the audience. And then they'd do 2 small circles and we're like, what's that? That's someone with glasses on, and then they do crazy, but things like 2 large circles, and you're, what's that? And that's someone with big boobs, and they would these things that, we're like, okay, that's an insight. Now we have to be able to mirror that or mimic that or take the paper-based system that they were using and move it into a digital system and actually make it a system that helped the restaurant run better. It helped the host be better at what they were doing. It helped the manager be better at what they were doing. It helped the servers be better at what they were doing. It helped the restaurant owner be better at it. And so that was sort of the fanaticness that we had in the business. And so the best thing that happened, back to your question, sorry, long-winded answer, but the best thing that happened to OpenTable was the downturn in '02 and the downturn in sort of '06, really. And the reason is because we were able to raise capital. There was, as you can imagine, 8 other companies out there doing it, but we were lucky enough to be able to raise capital because we had good investors around us. We had Bill Gurley, then eventually we had Michael Dell, Adam Dell, Michael Dell's brother from Dell. And so we were able to get a good crop of investors around us because we were a business that was, it was a negative cash flow business to build. We would sell a restaurant. It would cost us about $4,000 to sell that restaurant. Initial revenue was about $200 a month, $300 a month, and so we had to figure out how to, get that. And we took time, but we were able to get it so that, the average cost of a sale went down to about $800, and we could do, $400 or $500 a month to a restaurant. And so, we shortened that tremendously, the payback period for it. But so in '02 and later, '06, I think, both of those were sort of downturns in the capital markets, which didn't allow any of our competitors to raise capital, and so we could be as so in '98, you had to be as irrational as your least rational competitor was, right? And so you had to be dumb and give the systems away. And that's what a lot of AI companies are struggling with now, is the revenue is low because everyone's charging $1,000 or 10 grand a year for their services, and the products are worth a lot more than that. And so, but it's hard because there's an over invested in capital. And so companies that can figure out how to weather that storm, I think, are going to be the ones that figure out how to win.
Speaking of weathering storms, you had to weather a storm where you could almost not make payroll. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So serendipity matters. So take advantage of it when you can. So we were raising our Series C. We were trying to get about a $10 million round, and this was sort of in me, again, stalking Bill Gurley, basically. He was, Adam Dell was interested in doing, he was living in New York, had a $100 million venture fund, wanted to do a deal with a West Coast venture firm, knew Bill. Bill had just seen these 3, systems. Bill told Adam, hey, if you want to lead the round, and if you're interested in leading the round, we'll follow. And so it was a Thursday around 11 o'clock in Palo Alto. We were meeting for lunch. It was a restaurant called Il Fornaio, which used to be the place to do deals in Palo Alto years ago. And we had 65 people on the payroll. I had payroll due tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., and I did not have enough money to cover payroll. And it was not, in hindsight, it was not a very responsible thing for us to get to that point, but we were there. About 15, I'd probably had, 100 investment pitches at the time, and no one liked the business because it was a shoe leather, we had to send a salesperson to a small business, sell that small business. The cost of the sale, like I said, was $4,000. The revenue stream was $200 to $300 to $400 a month. It takes a long time to pay that back. The J curves from a cash standpoint are very low and go very deep. And so about 15 minutes in, we didn't know the whole backstory about what Bill said to him and that he was looking to do this. And about 15 minutes in, I'm with me and my one of my other senior team members. And Adam's like, we're in. And we're like, wait, what, huh? What'd you say? He's like, I'm in. And we're like, oh, that's awesome. We're like high-fiving, and this is great. And I'm like, but we have a problem. We have payroll in the morning, and we don't have money to cover it. And so he, it's a good negotiating position, am I right? And so he said, will $1 million do you? And we said, yeah, $1 million should do us. And he said, get your wiring information, and I'll call my office, and we'll wire you $1 million this afternoon. And no terms, no docs, no diligence, no nothing. So it was good. So he did one, and then he was agreeing to 3 of the 10 we were doing, and then Bill did 3, and then we had 3 from our existing investors, and then we got $1.5 million from American Express, so it went to $10.5 million. And a couple, I don't know, 1 or 2 other small funny stories with that. So when Adam wired he wired us the 1, and then when we were doing our closing, he wired us 3, and we're like, Adam, you're only supposed to wire us 2 more. He's like, oh, can you wire that back? I'm like, yeah, we'll wire it back. Can I send you a check, though? I've never signed a $1 million check. That'd be kind of fun. So we mailed him the check back. But, Adam, when they launched that fund, it was, during the 98, vintage. And so there's not a lot of great funds in that vintage. But he had, 17 companies in the fund, and it was a $100 million fund, and we returned him $125 million, just us alone. And so, like, it worked for him. So his risk with us, we paid back, and Adam's been was a great supporter along the way. But yeah, it was just, we had him in 2 other meetings later in the day, and after he wired us the $1 million, I canceled the other 2 meetings because, we were on the edge. So, yeah. So.
Clearly, it's nice to have capital when your competitors don't have capital. Clearly, you can make opportunity out of downtimes. But you also have to raise capital, and you've done it successfully. Besides stalking people, what are other effective methods of fundraising?
Stalking's pretty effective, but
it is.
We heard a little bit of it over the last day and a half, and I think understanding. So I'll put myself on the other side of the table here a little bit as a current investor, and things that I like to see. We're an impact fund, so besides that, take that off the table. We like to see people who get out into the wild, right? That are out in it. They're not just whiteboarding, great solutions. And here's what it's easy to take a Excel spreadsheet and drag a column or a cell to the right and get some growth out of it or whatever. But go out and show me that there's something in the field. And so we were out in the field every day with these restaurants. Again, all the time that I spent. And so we were working with them and understanding their needs intimately in that. And so get out into the wild. We had we believed a revenue model that made sense, the unit economics, and being able to tell that story. We had a differentiated TAM. We had a great team in that. And so for us, it was, we, like a lot of people, weren't getting paid market. I was probably more generous with equity than I needed to be, but I was a first-time founder, and so I did offer a fair amount of grants to other people on the team. I was young in my career, at least from a management and leadership standpoint in this. And for me, the number one thing was, how do we make this company successful, right? And if I had to give up more equity to do that, I honestly believed that I was going to be able to other companies and have other opportunities if I had this first success. And so I focused on that. And was I Jeff Bezos after the exit? No, but I did well. It was life-changing, And so, but I did give up some of the economics of it, knowing that I was going to have a long career ahead of me, and it's worked out. I've been involved in a number of other. I've actually made more money off the other stuff than that I've a couple of the other things that I've been part of than I did off OpenTable. But for me, it was all about, it wasn't about being right, it was about getting it right. And so I've been, I want to, that's why with the 45 initial investors, it was all about getting people around. And even when we looked at our board, we said, what does the company need to be good at? And we sort of came up with a list of 7 things. And I'm like, okay, this board member covers that. I've got this. We've got a head of marketing who's got that. We've got a hole here, we've got a hole here, and we've got these 2 covered by this. And so we were like, okay, when we're going to go find independent directors, we're going to fill these gaps that the company needs to be good at, and being very specific about, what does it take to be successful?
You had to do a lot of hiring and firing at OpenTable. Can you talk about both? effective hiring, and then how to, as possible, effective firing?
Yeah, I think the adage, hire slow, fire fast is true. I mean, it's hard to pick, at least in my experience, it's hard to pick. It's hard to know for 100% that you've got the right person, right? Because especially as a company goes through the growth stages, right? You've got, a smaller stage where there's 10 of you in the office and you each need to be able to do 8 different things because that's sort of the world that you're doing. And then there's, when the company sort of hits like, 40, 50 people, and then when the company hits like 100 people, like there's these changes in, sometimes people are generalists and they need to like narrow in more on their specialty. Sometimes people are good at keeping people informed in helping, with the change management, because there's a ton of change management. There's obviously being able to, I think culture is one of the strongest things a company can have, and it can be one of its most differentiated tools or powers, if you will. And so we spent, a tremendous amount of time hiring people, and we would be very disciplined about what is the role we need, what are we hiring for, how do we do it, and we'd hire them, and probably, I don't know, maybe just probably weren't very good hires. Probably 30% of the time we were wrong, and so we would make changes to that because like talent, culture and talent are the 2 number 1 things, in my opinion, maybe followed third by capital that a company needs to be able to be successful. And so that's where, at OpenTable, we spent a lot of time on culture. We spent a lot of time on talent. Not that we got it right, and but we made mistakes and learned from those mistakes and continued to move on.
Let's rewind now, your Army experience. And so why did you join the Army? And looking back now, decades, how did the Army positively or negatively impact your journey as a founder and investor?
Yeah, I mean, the Army was a great experience for me, and I was a little bit of a knucklehead in high school and got in a lot of trouble. The military for me gave me a chance to sort of discover who I am. It got me out of my environment. It helped me sort of see the world. I was born and raised in the East Bay here, but hadn't seen a lot of the world. And so it was one of those things that taught me about discipline. I had no discipline at home. There was a lot of drugs in my background, not from me personally, but from like the housing system that I lived in and whatnot. So got exposed to a lot of that, and I just knew that. And I was lucky enough to go to the one thing my mom was good at was getting me into good schools, and so I went to school in Lafayette, which was it's a better to do or well-to-do community out here that's got a fairly good high school. But I was, again, I was the guy who got in trouble a lot, but so it gave me time to mature. It taught me a lot about leadership. It taught me a lot about camaraderie because I didn't really have any brothers or anything growing up, obviously some friends. It taught me about team first, and it's one of my philosophies still to this day that I feel like I learned in the military was, yes, it's an individual's responsibility, like it's from, as I look at it, and this is what we do internally within where I'm at now, and it's probably less so at OpenTable, but it's an individual's, it's one of your team members' responsibility to get better, but it's also your responsibility to help them get better. And that's something that, we now take seriously where I'm at, and like, it's all about development of the people that we have. And if we can't develop them, and if they're not willing to be developed, then we have to move on and move better. But we're going to lean into like one of our core cultural sort of things is inside out. So we start with the people. One of my favorite entrepreneurs out there is a guy named Danny Meyer, who started a bunch of world-class restaurants in New York.
Shake Shack, I think.
Yeah, Shake Shack is also his, if you're familiar with that. And he sort of thinks about his ring of folks, and we're stealing it. Is people, right, first, customers second. You take care of your people, they will take care of your customers. Then in 3 and 4, I mix up sometimes. It's suppliers and community. I think it's community and suppliers, and then it's investors fifth, right? And if he believes strongly, if you go in that order, that your investors will get taken care of, And so that's the mindset that we have. It is people first. We do try and develop them. We do try and have a great culture. But yeah.
So in startups and venture, sometimes people say, and in music and movies, it's like that person's a one-hit wonder. You've had multiple hits. So OpenTable IPO'd, sold off to Bookings.com for billions of dollars. Then you moved on to GrubHub. Can you talk about that transition from OpenTable to GrubHub?
Yeah, so as I transitioned out of the CEO role for OpenTable, my wife wanted to go back to where she was from, and because we were having kids, and she wanted to sort of have those around her family. So we moved back to Chicago. I wanted to understand the tech scene in Chicago. At the time, it was an oxymoron. There wasn't a tech scene in Chicago. Like out here, a big fund would be, I don't know, 400 or 500 million. Back in Chicago, a big fund would be 35 million, right? Like it just was a different scale of the risk profile in Chicago was different. And so in Chicago was trying to be San Francisco and sort of living, so I was just doing a landscape analysis, if you will, of what was out there, and got to know a number of sort of tech entrepreneurs there. Got to know the founders of GrubHub, Mike and Matt, and so just being able to, I joined them when they were 4 people. I was the 5th person there, and really helped them take the same model as we did in OpenTable, local two-sided network, and how do you go after that, and what are all the rules, and how do you think about, everything from, we did really silly things. We didn't call it a contract, we called it an agreement, because a contract meant a lawyer. Agreement, something I can sign myself as a restaurant owner. We would help them get it down to like 1 page, and so anything that wasn't gonna, anything that stopped the sale from happening or slowed the sale from happening, we got rid of. We got the sales, we took a lot of the lessons we learned from OpenTable and brought them to GrubHub about like how do you make this, in the restaurant industry, as an example, again, sort of thinking about how do you adapt to the customer. Basically, a lot of these operators were, sort of operator owners, and they were in the business all day long, and they would have basically from 10 to 11:30 and from 2 to 4:30 available. And so if you're hiring expensive salespeople who have to really sell to the CEO of a business, you only got 4 hours a day to leverage that person, right? And so that gets to be a very expensive resource. And so now how do we maximize that 4 hours? And so we then got, the sales call down to like a 35-minute call. The first 10 to 12 minutes we used a spin selling technique where we asked questions. And so we really set up how do we understand their business really well. Then the second, sort of 10 minutes, 12 minutes was, okay, based on what you just told me, and so the words we were using, but based on what you just told me, here's how the system would benefit you as a customer. And then the last, sort of 8-10 minutes was a presumptive close. Here's the agreement. You sign right here. We'll get you up by this time. And so we took a lot of those principles and actually even put them on steroids at GrubHub to be able to really, they got it down to the ability of, if you sign by 4 today, we will have you live by dinner tonight, type of thing. And we're able to, do an outsource, so we could fax the menu overseas. It would be chopped up into 4 or 5 parts. Each of those 4 or 5 parts, this was still before OCR, would be entered into a system, and so you could then have them up and going within so within a couple hours. And so it was this ability to get in, make the sale, and move on type of thing. And so it was just a lot of. I'm sorry, I'm sort of drifting off from your question, but yeah, and so in Chicago. There was this, I think, opportunity. I got to know Brian from Braintree, who is Venmo, and sort of, got to work with him a day a week, got to work with the GrubHub guys 2 days a week. And so I got to spend a lot of time with, as I was, stepping out of OpenTable, these other really innovative entrepreneurs who were, tenacious. I've heard perseverance, a lot of times today. Obviously, it's a strong military culture as well. And yeah, anyway, so.
So much to mind there. First is that it felt like those teams got a co-founder to work with them and learn the lessons that they could have avoided from what you learned from at OpenTable. And then it also, what I find fascinating is, how did you pick those companies? Because those are both fantastic companies.
I mean, there's some serendipity in life for sure. I mean, I went out and, I was out in the community. All due respect, I kissed a lot of frogs, and most of those frogs stayed frogs, and so got to meet them. I liked their character. I liked how hard they were working. I liked that they got out in the field. I liked that they weren't afraid of failure. Failure is just information. It's how do you, okay, that's not working. Great, now I know that. Now I can go do this, or now I can go do that. And so, like, to me, failure is a gift, I mean, there's catastrophic failure maybe you don't want to do, but I think, it's a great learning lesson and a great opportunity to sit there. And I know a lot of the folks here, when you come back from a mission, you would debrief right after action reviews and really figure out what went wrong and what went right, and that's where you got, I think, most of your learning. I mean, that's a skill set that I do not think the current business environment does enough, frankly, is that learning opportunity. But if you look at, I mean, again, the Googles of the world, the Facebook, like it's all about learning. How fast can you gain knowledge, right? And you fail sometimes, but that's an opportunity. That's a gift.
So if you have any questions, please start lining up behind either the microphones. I have a few more questions, and then we'll go into audience questions. So this now gradually transitions to investor. So it sounds like you're a part-time operator deciding which companies to work with. That sounds almost like you're also deciding who to invest your time in. How did that transition from investing your time into investing capital go?
So a number of small things, and I'll try not to bore everyone with my own sob stories here, but so with, and in no particular order, but with the birth of my first daughter, I started to wonder what the world might be like when she got older. And so, and I thought a lot about climate change, and at the time there was peak oil and, some other things that people were talking about. And so I basically spent 2 years, we lived in a neighborhood of Chicago, Lakeview, and I basically built an urban farm. I mean, I had chickens, and I was tapping my maple trees, and I had solar panels, and I was
Sounds like that veteran. There's a certain type of veteran that does that.
I was like hunkering down. I had 2 years worth of food that I put in my basement, right? So, and so there was that realization of like, okay, my 6,200 square foot piece of land in Chicago wasn't going to save Chicago, right? Type of thing. And so, and then I started to think about. There was actually, again, serendipitously, there was these two women who were starting something similar to Techstars or Y Combinator, if people are familiar with that cohort model, around impact businesses that actually are for profit and for impact, right? And so you had to have both of those things, and they were starting a cohort program as well, similar to that, and they were looking for someone to run it, build it, and run it, and so. I was sort of transitioning out of my time with GrubHub, because when they went public, I didn't want to work on public boards, and some other stuff. And then there was, like I said, with my daughter and sort of thinking about stuff. And so I got this opportunity to build this cohort thing that we were, recruiting a bunch of companies. And so we were working on the talent of entrepreneurs in space, again, because I had talked to hundreds of, if not thousands of entrepreneurs in Chicago. Everything from people building gardens on the south side to, other tech, that was happening. And then with sort of, that, and then we wanted to develop the investor ecosystem as well. So I got to know a bunch of investors and some very high net worth individuals. There's one gentleman, a young guy named Lucas Walton. His grandfather started Walmart. Sam
An Army veteran.
What's that?
Sam Walton was an Army veteran.
Yeah, he was a veteran too, yeah. Was in Vietnam. And Lucas's dad was in Vietnam, sorry. Not saying, Sam was a veteran too? Yes. Yeah, I think you're right, yeah. So, but Lucas's dad was too, and so Lucas was the only child. His dad had passed in an airplane accident. And so, but Lucas was really thinking about, when he was young, he was sick, and his parents between Western medicine and an organic garden they planted, he got better. These are sort of small vignettes. Obviously, there's more to a story, but just as the context for where we're going. 2 was every summer his parents would sail up and down for weeks or up to a couple months, the Sea of Cortez, which is the Gulf of California, and so he got to love the ocean. And his dad was an early investor in First Solar, which is one of the first clean tech 1.0 companies that survived and whatnot. And so between those 3, he had a deep passion for sustainable food, sustainable and healthy food, sustainable oceans, and sustainable energy or energy transition. And so, back in 2014, he reached out. He was one of our smaller investors because we were just doing $550K every year for each of those cohorts.
Impact Engine.
Yeah, Impact Engine. And he was a 25K investor, which his office didn't know really how to wire 25K. It was kind of it's too small for them. Anyways, but he, great partner, and we got to know each other. And he's like, hey, I want you to come help me build this thing. And so worked with him and a couple other people to build out what we're doing now, which is called S2G. And we just changed the name to Investments because we spun out. But with him, we've now got about $2.5 billion in capital. We're investing across about 3 different funds or 3 different fund types. We got food, ag, energy, and oceans, all in transition. All companies that are non-concessionary, so we have to believe these companies can perform at or better than conventional company from a risk-adjusted market rate return. So really focused on that. We have some failures for sure, but we've also got some successes, and we've learned a lot about these types of businesses. We call it tough tech, which there's different gross margin structures than a lot of the companies here. There's different sales cycles. There's different regulatory and they're the oligopoly structure. If you look at Google's 25, 28 years old, whatever it is. It's got $1 trillion market cap. General Mills, who's a food company, 150 years old, it's got, $50 billion market cap. So you just look at the difference in these markets, and we're building companies that actually can be successful. So we're not building the Apples and Googles, but we're building other, in the food space type of thing. And it takes a different mindset of the entrepreneur. It takes a different mindset of the capital providers. And, there's a little bit of boom and bust in the food and ag space and ag tech because a lot of venture investors, us included, came in like it's a venture, a Silicon Valley venture mindset. And these companies aren't Silicon Valley, venture types of companies. We can get great returns and from a risk-adjusted standpoint do very well, but it took some time to learn. And we had Lucas was a great partner. Again, we're a GP/LP structure. We spun out from him last year. He's still a limited partner in us and a great supporter and fan, but he's now very, very minority owner in us. And yeah, so we're a group of about 50 people. We've tried to differentiate in 2 ways. One is this sort of idea of going after impact. 2 is we've looked at where we think the right dearth of capital is, and it really is in that late stage venture, early growth. And so we like to write checks 25 to 75 million, to companies that sort of have product market fit. They know, but there's all this. So I think about the journey of a company as idea, validate, process, infrastructure, and scale. So you have an idea, you then validate it, you then build process, you then build infrastructure to act on that process, and then you scale, right? And so they've got validation, and now we're in the help them build process and scale. And that's where we lean in as investors. We come in with, we have thought leadership, we have talent, we have operational excellence, we have culture. There's a number of different services we bring into the portfolio. And yeah, so I get to work with fantastic people who are, I'm not an entrepreneur right now. I guess I am with a little bit of what we're doing, but massive respect for entrepreneurs, but I get to work with them every day.
And very mission-driven, and another thing you all bring is experience, a ton of experience. I can't believe there's no one lining behind any of these microphones, but I have a ton of questions. What do you prefer, founder or investor, and why?
I mean, founder for sure. Like it's
You're a sadomasochist.
I mean, the investor's good for me right now because I get to work across a lot of things and I've got a short attention span. And a founder's so much harder, but so much more rewarding from that standpoint. Like to serve customers that want your product and you're changing an industry. I mean, we I've been lucky enough to be part of things that have changed industries, and so, I mean, seeing that is powerful. It's fun.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Gabriella Bell. This does not seem to be made for shorter people. I'm a founder at Organized Q. We're based in Washington, D.C., service-based business. I'm more curious about hearing some stories about, people shooting their shots and what you've seen that has really landed well and what you've seen that might have fallen flat, but you thought, that's pretty creative and interesting.
Authenticity, I think there's nothing that beats that from that standpoint. You're talking about like a pitch to an investor. Yeah, so authenticity. I think having, it's this stubborn humbleness to some degree, like having an opinion. Like if I say, oh, well, shouldn't it be red? Oh yeah, we're gonna make it red, or whatever. Like no, I wanna hear you holding on to a vision. I wanna hear you hearing in benefiting from the fact that us as investors, we do see a lot of things, and we've probably seen something similar to your company 3 or 4 or 8 or 10 times type of thing. And so we've got opinions on why or why not we think something won't work. But I think having a tenacity of, it's a balance. It's a humble balance of like, I'm going to make this work, but I'm going to take your feedback and learn from that, right? And that's sort of like, it's not a failure, but like when a failure happens, you want to learn from that. How do you adjust with that? And you can't believe everything you say because there's just some people who aren't the right investors for you, right? Like it's the whole adoption curve, right? Like innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards, right? Like the big bell curve we all see. And you want to be talking to the people who are early adopters and innovators because they're the ones who sort of get what you're doing. Now, if you're talking to a laggard or a late state, they're going to be like, yeah, it's not going to work, whatever, right? And so that's where I think you want to find the people, and this is where you kiss a frog, and if it stays a frog, move on.
Thank you.
How many frogs do you think you had to kiss as a founder pitching? And do you think that's the similar ratio of founders having to kiss investors, to use that analogy, yeah.
I mean, when I was originally raising for OpenTable, it was the .com. It was similar to AI now. You take a company name and you add .com to the end of it, or you add .ai to the end of it, and it's suddenly worth more, right? I mean, that was when like Kmart was trying to come online, and just it was like all these brands, like they had no idea what they were doing coming online, but they got valued more because they came online. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. But.
So initially it was easy, but how about subsequent?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've done hundreds of investor pitches, everything from offering to drive someone to the airport and give them the pitch on the way. They said, I'm traveling today. I said, great, can I drive you to the airport? They're like, okay. So I drove them to the airport to like meeting them in person. I realize the culture has moved to Zoom a little bit, which is great for distance, but like if there's someone who you think is the best, like we knew Bill Gurley, he had done two-sided networks. That was his thing. eBay, things like that was his thing. We needed Bill Gurley on our cap table if we were going to win. So the question was, how the fuck do we get Bill Gurley on our cap table, sort of thing. And so if you have investors that you think need to objectively be on your cap table, go find them. Go get them. Hey, I'm going to be in Virginia next week. Are you happen to be around? Oh, you are? Okay, great. Okay, United Airlines, can I get a trip to Virginia next week? That's what you got to do, right? So you got to go find out how to get those people and help them understand. And, investors are people too, to some degree, in that, our kids break an arm and we have to cancel meetings sometimes, or, and sometimes there's things that are not related to the entrepreneur that we go through, and I'm sure entrepreneurs go through as well. but I would just be persistent and like touch base. And even if like, you know, I've heard this morning too, is shouldn't be, the first time you talk to an investor, you shouldn't be asking them for a check, right? The whole idea of ask for a check, get advice, ask for advice, get a check. And so like, listen to them, understand what they need. What solves their problem? What are they looking for? How many more investments can they do? How do you fit into their fund life cycle? You know, they may be near the end of their fund life cycle and they can't write an early stage check. They just can't, because that's going to push them out past what their LPs are expecting when to return capital. So there's lots of these types of factors that you should try to understand from an entrepreneur, that, you know, how do you help solve their problem as an investor, and that's going to help them lean into you more as an entrepreneur.
Quick note about Bill Gurley. So eBay, then OpenTable. I'm sure I'm going to miss a few, but then Uber, and also WeWork, amongst with many, many other great companies. GrubHub. Wow. Did you get him in GrubHub?
I pulled him into GrubHub, yeah. So.
Bill Gurley owes you some money too, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Bill's a phenomenal individual. If you ever watch any of his stuff, he's just a phenomenal. Like, he understands the financials of a business and how they break down, and what better than, I mean, anyone I've ever seen.
So real quick plug, if Bill Gurley is the master of two-sided marketplaces, context, we want to be the masters at veterans seeking pre-seed funding. Yeah. So please talk to us if you're doing pre-seed funding. Sir.
Yes, sir. John Casray, InvestWise, learninvestwise.com. We're an online platform for sustainable real estate investing. And I know for your funding, you do a lot of, funding into incentives and energy, food, for example. And my question is, has there been a lot of reduction in terms of incentives or increased barriers for growth in terms of sustainability or sustainable innovation that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, it's. If I think I understand your question, it's seeing a little bit of a pullback right now.
Yeah.
In that. I think this administration has a different opinion on some of that stuff, and so, frankly, we're hearing from a lot of folks in Washington. And not all, but many, we still believe in what you're doing. Can you just call it weather instead of climate, and I can get you in this meeting, right, sort of thing. And so it hasn't changed what we're doing. It changes a little bit of the language that we're using, I think. I think these are all businesses that we think from a, I fundamentally think that from a long-term perspective, if you're not starting a business right now that's thinking about sustainability and impact, that you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage. And there's a number of reasons, and I can bore you on what those are, but talent, more and more talent's looking for things that align with their values. Capital, more and more capital's looking for things that align with that, and whether it's funds out of Europe, whether it's family offices here in the States, whether it's CalPERS here in California thinking about the long-term viability of their pensioners. 3 is the dematerialization of stuff. I mean, think about a cell phone. I mean, that 5-10 years ago would have been a computer the size of the stage or something as to what we can deliver up on that. 4 is regulatory and policy. Like, it's like Oakland and San Francisco are suing Shell and Chevron for climate change, right? So that's whether they're going to win or not. It's more money that Shell and Chevron have to spend. 4 is surety of supply. If I'm Walmart, if I'm any one of these companies, I got to get shit on my shelf. And if there's holes on my shelf, that's bad. And if you have climate issues and weather, and that causes disruptions in your supply chain, that's the number one thing that most large organizations are thinking about right now. And then maybe 6, all things being equal, if you've got a product that's as good, and that has to be as good, and it's more climate friendly than a product that's not, consumers are going to choose the one, on average, the one that's better, right? And so there's macro forces moving in that direction. It doesn't mean, we call it the Patagonia principle, and sorry, I'm dragging on here. We call it the Patagonia principle. Like, Patagonia didn't start off with sustainability as its core value proposition. It was their core ethos, but it wasn't their core. They had to make sure the company was successful financially first. And once you had a successful financial company, then they worked on a lot of the sustainable cotton and all these other things that now differentiate them from their competitors. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chuck, thanks so much. John Denniston, Air Force veteran, building platform in the elder care space. And I'm curious, I'm sure over the years you've gotten pitched OpenTable for X on all kinds of concepts and ideas. I'm curious to know the lens you think about through that question. You know, why was OpenTable successful where other marketplace aggregation plays may not be? What's your lens on that? How do you filter what's going to work in that, what doesn't? Yeah,
how long you got? So I'll try and be quick on that. But so every two-sided network is different, right? And how they do it, type of thing. What I think is one of the keys, at least was for OpenTable and for GrubHub, and I could tell those two stories, and they're actually the same but the opposite. So is how do you seed one side of the network? Right? With OpenTable, we had this system that went and replaced the paper-based reservation system that they were using before and actually made that restaurant run better. It was long before an internet reservation ever came through the system, right? So it was an operating platform for them to be able to use on a day-to-day thing. They took the reservations in there. They ran the restaurant at night in there. They did outbound marketing from that. So it was this system that made them better. And then we just plug the internet into the back of it, and that's how you could get reservations to it, right? So we seeded the restaurant side. So what we did is look for the top restaurants in every city. We went and got a handful of those top restaurants because all they cared about is taking better care of their current customers. Their seats were full. They didn't need more customers, but they wanted something that helped them take better care of their customers. And a lot of them had like 3x5 note cards that were up on a shelf for the old reservation book, and that was hard, right? And so we made a tool that was easier for them to take better care of their current customers. Then you get like the next 75 restaurants in a market who all want to be those top 25 restaurants in a market. And so they're doing whatever the top 25 restaurants are doing. Then we got enough critical mass to where the next 100, 200, 500 restaurants in the market, all they want is more butts and seats. And now there was velocity happening through the network to bring those butts into seats. And so GrubHub was the opposite. They actually did it to where they helped the diner first, right? Because there's two main things that when we order online, there's two major types of personas. One is I want to try something new, or one is and that's I want to try something new because I moved to a new location, or I had a life event like a pregnancy or a birth of a kid, or I moved to a new, and so that was something where I wanted to learn to try something new. Like how do I discover something? And then there's the other type of person who orders online they want the same thing every time. They just had this group of 5 or 6 menus in the drawer. They always knew what they were. And so what GrubHub did is really figure out the discovery piece. How do you start to bring these restaurants online? How do you put their ability up there? And the delivery zone. So they were the first to go out and find, if I put my address in at one Main Street, what restaurants deliver to me? So now I'm aggregating for discovery consumers, like here's 9 new restaurants I can try. And so they would call those restaurants at first, and then they would see, okay, which restaurants are getting called, so I'm gonna go sell those restaurants first. But they aggregated the consumers, whereas in OpenTable, we aggregated the restaurants. So I like the idea, and I've seen it work in many situations where you seed one side, you add a value to one side that allows you to create critical mass there, which then allows you to go after the other side.
Thanks.
Hi, Boyd Bishop, former Army officer, medical service officer, currently the co-founder and CEO of Hive Technologies. Our mission is to democratize access to mobility. One of our strategic partners is Uber, and we're working on a problem with them, which is how to transition low and moderate income consumers from a ICE vehicle to an electric vehicle. So I've worked with a lot of two-sided marketplaces. My question for you is kind of almost following up on what you were just talking about, but as you're doing that initial pitch to the investor on the two-sided marketplace, what problem are you telling them that you're trying to solve? It sounded like you initially kind of came to OpenTable with a consumer problem that your wife had, but then you really started getting into the problems that from the restaurant side of it. So I'm curious about what your pitch was, and I guess what your advice is for pitching that type of business when a lot of feedback that I hear is like, focus on one singular problem. So which problem, were you pitching as OpenTable that you were solving, and any advice on that?
Yeah, so I'll I'm going to say two things, and they might sound contradictory actually in that. And so one is I like to tell the big picture first, but quickly get to the solution you're solving in that gets to that big picture, right? It shouldn't be like a 45-minute journey to that thing. It should be like here's the big picture, then here's the next big picture, and then here's the solution we're starting with that then leads back out to this big picture. So I like that in because I want to. I'm a very, I love the details. I want to see the details personally, but I gotta know where I'm going for those details personally. And then, but the other side of that if I see a business plan with like 6 revenue lines, I'm like, that's tough, right? It's hard to build a business. It's hard to build a single business that's world class, let alone multiple businesses inside of a business. And so what I like is the story of, even if you're a platform, what I like is the story of here's the core. Even like today, like Google still makes most of its money on a single, solution, right? It's AdSense AdWords, right? And so I know they're diversifying all that, and probably the Google people hate me right now for saying that. But but like I want to see what are you going to be successful in first from a revenue standpoint. I call it my ice cream sundae, and then you can have this beautiful ice cream sundae that is a standalone business by itself that I would be excited to be part of, and then you have 5 or 6 cherries on top, and we could go to here, and we could go to here, and we can go to here. When I told the OpenTable story, the initial one was it was going to be Easy Eats, not a great name, but it was going to be then Easy Cuts, Easy Docs, Easy Putts, and so like haircuts, doctors, golf courses. But everyone said, show me one that works first, and restaurants was big enough, right? So we focused maniacally on restaurants only, even though we got calls from doctors. And the two times we screwed up at OpenTable was, one, we had a hotel group come to us and say, yes, we want you in our restaurants, but we also want you to do our takeout or our room service app for us too. And we're like, okay, great, we can do a room service app. Totally screwed us up. Now we had 2 products, we had 2 sales teams, we had 2 support teams, we had 2 dev teams. It was terrible. And then someone came along, actually, I can't remember the name of the group, but they were a casual wait list type of, which is different than a reservation. And like, can you build us, it's Cheesecake Factory. They said, can you build us a wait list app? We're like, sure, we can build a wait list app. And 2 dev teams, 2 sales teams, 2 support teams, and it was a disaster. And so, so I think trying to figure out how do you get a single revenue stream product, or that's like 80 or 90% of your revenue, that can get to a good sized business, and then you can go B, C, D, and E, and whatever. That's my worldview. I'm not, I don't know if everyone thinks like that.
Thank you.
Last question, but before we go there, so it was originally Easy Eats, and my understanding is the chefs thought that was like too vernacular, too proletarian, and so you all changed it to something more highfalutin.
Yeah, they just thought it was too like casual. I mean, these were a lot of high-end restaurants that we were talking to. And actually what I did, and I heard someone talk about this yesterday, I went to Union Square and we had a list of names, and we passed out $5 bills to anyone who would.
In 98.
Yeah, in 1998. What do you think of this name? What do you I mean, and I don't know how many of them were actually potential OpenTable users, but we got feedback. We were red box before red, because we were going to paint the box red maybe on the host stand so people recognize when they came in. We had reserve.com. We had a bunch of names, and so but people loved OpenTable. So although it's 4 syllables, where Yahoo, Google, Facebook, they're all 2. But anyway. So
real quick, Union Square, if you look at the center of Union Square, for you Navy folks, it commemorates Admiral Dewey in the Battle of the Philippines. Sir.
Hey, good morning, Mark Carrion. I'm not a founder, just a guy with a mustache getting out of the Navy this summer. But yesterday we heard from investors, and they were talking about how they missed out on certain deals. And I was wondering, with your experiences on both sides as a founder and an investor, who do you feel holds frame, kind of holds the power in that relationship?
I mean, it's a pendulum. It swings back and forth. There are times where the entrepreneurs have more leverage in it. Right now, it happens to be that investors have more leverage in most conversations. If you're an entrepreneur that's growing, 70% a year, you've got great, you've got a good product market fit, you got great margins, you're still in, control, or still have a, strong leverage. I mean, but I think the conversation of the gentleman was up here just before me, I mean, try and find ways to not get investors involved. I mean, they can be super helpful and part of the solution, but like, customer money's the best money there is, right? And then non-dilutive grant money, as long as it doesn't like hinder or cause you to go do things that you wouldn't normally do in building the business. Being scrappy, right? Like, get a 90-cent cup of coffee around a $4.50 cup of coffee, while you're growing the business, and have, treat capital like it's precious and it's special, and you won't depend on investors as much, or you'll just be in a better negotiating position when you go talk to investors. I love it when I talk to, because there are a bunch of times where I see a company I like, I reach out and they're like, yeah, we're not interested. I'm like, that is awesome. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been awesome chatting with you, Chuck. It's been awesome just seeing interaction through the years. We've had some amazing folks at the Military Veteran Startup Conference. Several of them enlisted. Black Rifle Coffee started by enlisted folks. But I think what I have come to really appreciate over the past few years is there are so many pockets of military veteran excellence across startups and big companies. Last year we had Kevin Mandia. He sold his company Mandiant for $5.4 billion to Google. There's other veterans that I think many of us don't know that have done tremendously well. Phil Knight of Nike, Steven Schwartzman, and I know there are many, many Chuck Templetons out there, and I know there's many Chuck Templetons in this room. And so it's going to be awesome to see the journey of all of us over the next few years. Everyone, please give a round of applause for Chuck.
Thank you, Tim.